I used to live at home alone until about 6 weeks ago. I enjoyed my solitude, the silence that came from being alone. I even used to listen to horror podcasts while I did chores to relax, because although scary, you never really believe anything that creepy can happen to you. It felt like any other day. I went to work, had lunch, ran a few errands after work, stopped at the shops, and then went home. Boring, predictable, and nothing out of the norm. When the groceries were put away, I went to my room to do a little bit of reading while I listened to one of my favorite podcasts in the background. Again, boring, predictable. I didn't notice anything was off until a noise drew me away from my book. At first, I just thought it was a sound effect from the podcast, so I went back to my book without another thought. But then, the noise happened a couple more times. The dull, tapping sounds were almost rhythmic. But I realized what made me pause my book wasn't that the sound was out of place in the audio. It was the fact that it was coming from the opposite direction my video was playing, near my window that was to the right of my bed. I was frozen in place with that realization, and although I didn't want to look, I did. It was a man. The man looked to be in his late 40s, but I couldn't see him too well at the time because he was wearing all black. But what I did see was the man give me a slow smile that exposed his rotting teeth when he saw he had my attention. The smile unnerved me, but it was his casual wave at me and then his gesturing toward the window for me to open it that made me truly panic. I jumped up out of bed, pulled the window curtains until I couldn't see the man anymore, and then walked backward out of the room, not looking away from the window until I was in my living room. I went to grab my phone to call my dad, since I felt stupid for calling the police when the man did technically nothing besides creep me out. Of course, though, that night I couldn't find my phone anywhere. The man knocked, not being deterred by me closing the curtain. He knocked again and again, but gently at first, as I ran around my small apartment trying to locate my phone. Hysteria kicked in when the knocking on the window grew louder and more frantic. At one point he started yelling, but the words were lost in my panic-fueled brain. The power behind his fists hitting the window shook the wall so badly, some of my picture frames fell off the wall and crashed, shattering on the floor. And right when I was able to find my phone, the noise stopped. I didn't know what to do. I stupidly felt like I would be bothering or inconveniencing someone if I called them to come here just for the man to be gone. Eventually, I walked back to the window, and with all the courage I could muster, I moved the curtain aside, just enough to see if the man was still there. He wasn't. Then, the doorbell rang. I shouted at the man to go away when I heard my sister's voice come from the door. Realizing that the man could still be around the apartment building, I ran to the door and pulled her inside. I remember my sister being confused and asking me why I looked so scared, so I told her everything. It wasn't until I got to the end of my story that I noticed my sister was dead silent. She looked almost as scared as I did. She then told me when she was walking up to my apartment, an older man dressed in black was in front of my apartment and rang the bell. When he saw her, he quickly left without a word, and she had just assumed he had the wrong apartment when he saw her walk up. Needless to say, I stayed over at her place that night, and for every night for a week. She finally convinced me to break my lease and move in with her. I enjoy my solitude, but after that night, I value my safety more. This happened to me a little over 2 years ago. I lived with two of my friends who I've known since high school. My friends had gone away on some trip, but I couldn't go because I couldn't get the time off work. I wasn't overly bothered about it, to be honest, as I'm not much of a sports enthusiast, and they had gone hiking, so I decided to just stay at home on my own. A couple of nights in, I had decided to get a shower before bed, and just as I was rinsing the soap from my hair, the room went dark. We had a blackout, and this wasn't the first blackout we'd had recently. Some strong winds blew a transformer a couple of months back, and ever since then they seem to happen periodically. I rinsed the soap from my hair and body the best I could and stumbled around looking to find my towel. I didn't have any windows in my bathroom, so it was practically pitch black. As I moved out of the bathroom and into the hall, I noticed through the window that there still appeared to be light outside. I moved closer to see all the street lamps and neighbors still had electricity. I went to my bedroom to get a bathrobe so I could go outside in something more than a towel when I saw someone at the window with their hood up. I let out a scream like any normal person would, and he quickly ducked away from the window. It looked like one of the kids from across the street, but I couldn't be sure because it was dark, and I didn't get much of a good look at his face. I closed the drapes and quickly got dressed. I was furious at this point, thinking the neighbor kid had cut my power to try and sneak up on me. I went to the front porch, looking around, and I could see for certain that no other houses on the street had lost their electricity. Then I saw him. This time it was a little clearer, but I saw the neighbor kid trying to peek at me from around the house. I shouted at him and told him to turn my electricity back on or I would call the cops. But he just stood there, leering at me. I shouted, "Tommy, I know it's you. If you switch my electricity back on now, I won't call the police and I won't tell your mother." Tommy ducked back quickly, and a couple of minutes later, all my electricity came back on. I shut and locked the front door. I then realized that I hadn't washed all the soap from my hair, so I had to go and jump back in the shower to rinse off. As I was rinsing my hair, I heard footsteps in the bathroom. Someone was in there with me. I quickly washed the soap from my face and opened one eye, looking around. I saw a handheld camcorder filming me. I screamed, and the camcorder soon retracted, and then footsteps ran away. I got out of the shower as quickly as I could, and as I looked around, I saw no signs of a break-in, but the front door was wide open, and I knew I had locked it. I called the police, who came to take a statement from me, but as I didn't actually see who was in my house, and that there were no signs of a break-in, there wasn't a lot they could do. They did go to visit Tommy's parents, but his mom said he had been home all night and didn't own a camcorder, and she was 100% certain of this. Every now and again I see Tommy, and he always gives me a little wave and a creepy smile. I know it was him. I just don't understand how he got into my house and why his mother would lie for him. I'd been with my boyfriend Craig for about 2 years. We met at an improv class at the community theater, and I liked him right away. He was honestly the funniest man I'd ever met. At the time, I was dating a real loser named Marco, but I very quickly broke things off with him and started dating Craig. At first, things were great. We moved into a nice house in the foothills, and unlike our next-door neighbors, Pat and Lucy, who seemed to scream at each other every night, we were happy. Our house was filled with laughter. But over time, I started to get annoyed with Craig's constant joking. He never took anything seriously, and he always played pranks on everyone. I tried to tell him to stop, but he wouldn't listen. Last week, things got really bad between us. He'd borrowed a realistic-looking mannequin from the theater and put it in our bed. I woke up with its dead eyes staring into my face and just about had a heart attack. Craig filmed the whole thing. I was furious. I screamed at him and told him to get out. I never wanted to see him again. A few hours later, he called me to apologize. He begged me to give him another chance. I told him that all I wanted was a romantic night together. No jokes, no pranks. He agreed, promising that we'd have the best night ever. He said he'd come home at 8 with a big surprise. So I put on a nice dress and waited. Around 7:30 that night, I noticed someone sneaking around the side of our house. I couldn't get a good look at him, but I could tell that he was tall and thin, just like Craig. He'd told me he was planning a big surprise. I guess that meant another one of his stupid pranks. I got so angry. I could see him dragging something big and heavy across our yard. It seemed like another stupid mannequin. He was looking into the window, trying to see if I noticed him. I ducked below the window so he couldn't see me. Then I realized that I shouldn't hide. I needed to stop this nonsense. I marched right out the door to confront him. "Hey!" I shouted. The man froze. He looked up at me and I gasped. This wasn't Craig at all. It was Pat, our next-door neighbor, and the mannequin he was dragging. It wasn't a mannequin at all. It was the body of his wife Lucy, her face cratered in by blunt force trauma. Our neighbor had killed his wife, and now he was trying to dispose the body in the woods next to our yard. He dropped the body and stood up straight. He looked right at me, hate in his eyes. I should have run back inside, but I couldn't move. I was frozen in place. He walked toward me, reaching out. His hands were still red from his wife's blood. Just as I tried to turn and run, he grabbed me by the throat and squeezed. I tried to scream for help, but no sound came out. I was about to pass out when I heard someone scream, "Stop!" I couldn't see who it was, but I recognized the voice. It was Craig. Pat let me go, and as I gasped for air, I watched Craig tackle the killer to the ground. I'd never seen him get violent before, but right then, he was acting like a wild animal. He slammed Pat against the side of the porch hard enough for him to instantly lose consciousness. Then he pulled out his phone and called the police. By then, I was finally able to speak. I ran to Craig and wrapped him in a big hug. "I'm so sorry," I said. "I thought he was you." Craig laughed. "This wasn't the surprise I was talking about." Then he walked over Pat's unconscious body and picked up the giant teddy bear he bought for me. Its fur was stained with just a little bit of blood, but otherwise, it was perfect.